Good morning to everyone in India. Good afternoon to our friends in the Southeast Asia. Good evening to our friends in Australia and some other parts of the world. It's indeed my proud privilege to welcome all of you to the second day of the Global Law Schools Summit. We have with us a very special guest who is delivering the second keynote address of the summit. We have with us Mr. Cyril Shroff, who is the founder and managing partner of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. I have great pleasure in introducing Mr. Shroff. Mr. Shroff has nearly 4 decades of experience in a wide range of practice areas, including corporate and securities law, disputes, banking, bankruptcy, and infrastructure. Over the years, Mr. Shroff's passion for a just world, blended with a keen sense of fairness and empathy, has helped the Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas firm firmly establish itself as a trusted advisor to its clients. Mr. Shroff has consistently been ranked as star practitioner in India by Chambers Global and is often regarded as the M&A king of India. A thought leader and a visionary, Mr. Shroff is known for advising on many first-of-its-kind transactions in India. He regularly gets recognized as an award-winning professional across multiple areas of practices. He's also held distinguished positions of responsibility, including spearheading many public policy initiatives in India. He serves as chairman of FICCI's Corporate Laws Committee, member of CII National Council and Financial Markets Committee, chairman of the SCS ESG Advisory Board. He also served as member of the SEBI-constituted Uday Kota Committee on Corporate Governance and SEBI Committee on Insider Trading. He was also a member of the first Apex Advisory Committee of the IMC International ADR Center. For his distinguished contributions as a legal professional, he has been given a number of awards, including the Deal Maker of the Year, ALB India Law Awards 2020, named as A-List Icon in IBLJ A-List Lawyers 2020, included in Legal 500's Hall of Fame 2020, recognized as IFLR Asia Best Lawyers 2020, Band 1 Private Wealth Law, Chambers and Partners H&W Guide since it's published. Has been consistently recognized as an eminent practitioner for private equity, banking and finance, and restructuring, insolvency in India, and star individuals for corporate M&A in India. There are many more accomplishments to his credit. But something that I deeply have been inspired by his work is his strong support and contribution towards the advancement of institution building and nation building. I had the privilege to meet him even before the founding of OP Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Law School. And Mr. Shroff was one of those few individuals who believed in the vision and the imagination and the idea of OP Jindal Global University, Jindal Global Law School. Long before its creation, he not only supported the idea and walked with us all through this journey, and since the establishment of the school, he has been one of our strongest supporters and an institution mentors for our institution. I am deeply grateful to him for his leadership and his encouragement and his support all these years. With those words, I have great pleasure in presenting Mr. Cyril Shroff to deliver the keynote address. Over to you, Mr. Shroff.
Thank you, Raj, for that most generous introduction. I was, as you might have noticed, I was blushing all the way through it. But I think for me, the most valuable thing has been our friendship and the association with the Jindal University. So it's been a real pleasure. I delivered the keynote address last year as well. So I must have done something good. That's why you called me again. The last time, if you recollect, I had spoken about the Delta lawyer. And that, I think, is still a concept that kind of holds good. And we are seeing that some of that play out in the real world as well. But as I look back in the last 18 months, and I mean, I'm just using again the keynote address that I delivered, I think it was around the same time last December, as a reference point, and ask ourselves, okay, what have we learned since then? What have we learned from December 2020 to December 2021? And there are a couple of thoughts that come to mind. I think the first and the most obvious one is that we are truly living in a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Who would have thought on, say, 1st January 2020, that within a few weeks from then, the world will go into a massive lockdown. So I think the first point is that the future will almost always catch you unawares, no matter how much you plan. The second learning, I think, is that the future of work has almost permanently changed. I think it's still work in progress, but my instinct tells me that we are not going to go back to the old model of work. There's something that has very fundamentally changed. It required a pandemic and a lockdown to make us kind of realize the new working model. So I think that is going to have profound implications on a number of things, on culture, on the nature of work, on employment, and you name it. The third comment I would make is that with every challenge comes great opportunity. The greater the challenge, the greater the opportunity. And what we have seen in the last 18 months is that these challenges have been met by two different kinds of people: those who saw it as an opportunity and thrived from it, and those who actually saw it only as a challenge and paid the consequences. Some of them have been wiped out. So as we look at the VUCA world, I think we need to be clear about the fact that, that we are at the batting end, and from the bowler's end, you can get any kind of ball, and you can either get out or you can hit it for a six. The other comment I would have is that, unlike in the case of the global financial crisis, which at that time looked very profound, and it was going to change many things, including the world of law. But as we look back now, not that much changed. After a brief kind of hiatus, things kind of came back to a normal and maybe even more enhanced. But I feel that this crisis is a little different. I think at least some of the changes, including, say, for example, the ways of working, these are permanent changes. And I think these are going to be changes in the law firm world as well. How the law firm world reacts to this is still work in progress, but certainly a lot has changed. As part of the opportunity sort of paradigm, a lot of new areas of practice have emerged. One of which I think is the entire sphere of ESG. And both the E and the S and the G have each thrown up massive opportunities. It is going to be one of the biggest practice areas of the next decade, because every part of society, whether it be the public sector or the private sector, is going to have to be fluent in ESG, and there is very inadequate knowledge about these subjects at this point of time. So educational institutions such as yours, and I know, Raj, that you're already very much on this, but I think more broadly, the education world will have to put the accelerator on the ESG topic, and so will service providers like us have to embrace ESG, not just as a sort of a sideshow, but as a mainstream in our practice. I think, as you also know, the corporate landscape is changing at warp speed. Every month, I'm talking only of India just now, but I think it's true across the world. We are producing at least 2 or 3 unicorns, and these are finding their way into the capital markets, as well as they're affecting our lives in a very profound way. I mean, eating has not been the same after Zomato and Swiggy and whatever else are the equivalents across the world. Travel has not been the same, or at least boarding has not been the same after Airbnb. Local travel has not been the same after Ola, Uber, and all of that. So these changes are profound, and I think in this process we are creating the industrial titans of tomorrow. I think some of the old industrial titans and conglomerates will remain, but that list is going to be churned immensely, almost like a Samudra Manthan of the corporate sector, as we see the kind of new barons of tomorrow emerge. And they come with a very different paradigm. Their ownership structures are different. Their mindsets are different. Their worldview is different. Their Their sensibilities are very different from the past, and I think that is going to have massive implications on how legal services and professional services are delivered. And I think another change that we have learned is that the expectations of talent have changed. Expectations from life and expectations from work. I think there's a new social contract between the millennials and Gen Z with the nature of work itself and with their employer. And it is something which we are still grappling with. And I think the future really belongs to them. I can imagine we are already seeing that in the millennials and Gen Z are coming into the policy and the governance space as well. 10, 15 years from now, all the global leaders will either be millennials or Gen Z. You can imagine at the moment, of course, the US has a fairly old president, but a few terms from now, you will have a millennial in that office. The expectations from clients are changing, and the expectations from employers are changing from talent as well. So I think we are in a perfect storm and a fertile ground for innovation. It is also the greatest opportunity. I think as far as legal services are concerned, we are on the threshold of a golden era, if not already in it. And there is, depending on your own view of it, I think we are on a burning platform. Some firms, I think the traditional view of law firms would believe there is no burning platform. I mean, this too shall pass. And at some point of time, we'll just come back to the same workplace and just charge a little more and life will go on. But I don't think that is true. I think that there is a burning platform, not just because law firms and service providers think so or don't think so. There is a burning platform at the client side. There is a burning platform in the in-house legal community and in their own principles in terms of business, and they are going to force that change. So the law firm model, I think, is begging for reinvention. It is essentially a very short-term model. Most of them are general partnerships where the entire profits are distributed every year. Maybe sometimes you sort of keep back a little, but essentially it's a cash pass-through model. So nobody is investing for the long term. So except for a few, I think some firms across the world have started taking the long view and are investing for the future as well, especially because they recognize that the future is different. Whether it is different types of technologies or how they're going to re-engineer their process. Building on the Delta concept that I mentioned last year, I think there is even more a need for what's called a T-shaped lawyer. What's a T-shaped lawyer? T-shaped lawyer is essentially deep, at least on one thing, which is quite often just deep technical legal knowledge, but has also got some solid horizontals, which could be different skills, whether they are of sort of collaboration, technology, politics, social science, or whatever it is, because the clients are and their constituencies are asking for this. The day of just an I-shaped lawyer is over. Completely over. I think they will stagnate, and I think they will probably just become cogs in the wheel. But for the leaders and for the best professionals, the model is clearly the T-shaped law. So Raj, I think this begs the question of question which should be posed by legal education to itself is what changes should we be making to legal education to produce tomorrow's lawyers, to borrow Richard Susskind's phrase of, how are we going to produce lawyers who are fit for purpose? Because as they say, you have to design not for where the puck is today, but where the puck is going to be tomorrow. And these are issues both of syllabi as also of teaching methods. Again, as they say, astronauts cannot be trained in a classroom. You have to, before you send them out to space, you have to create kind of a virtual environment in which they know what outer space really looks like. So all sorts of techniques, I think, are on the threshold of entering legal education, whether it is tech awareness, a different mindset of more outcome-focused sort of training and delivery, rather than merely input-focused. So as they say, to use a medical example, it's not about the medicines that you prescribe, but what are patients concerned? The patients are concerned about health and not about the medicine that you gave them or what surgery you prescribed. Now, having said this, I would like to comment on a few specific topics which directly or indirectly impact the future of law and hence the future of lawyers. First, let me talk about geopolitics, because all of this is happening sort of on the base of tremendous movement and changes in the world of geopolitics. If there's one lesson that we have learned from Afghanistan, is that the US is no longer desirous of continuing its role as the global power. It will play its role as superpower selectively where it serves its own interest, and we can no longer rely upon the United States as kind of the guarantor of democracy or the rule of law across the world. To an extent, I think each nation will have to look after itself. What is also what we're seeing is that there is clearly a bipolar order that's emerging with the US and the China, and they're two completely different systems. One is clearly sort of believing in free values, and the other is autocratic. And I think they're going to produce two very different types of clusters of nations and ways of thinking. The nature of war will change. I think whilst nations will need to keep their tanks and missiles, I don't expect future wars to be fought with guns and missiles. And the future wars are going to be bio wars, technology wars, and things of that nature, which is going to require a very different level of preparedness and also advancements of science and policy rules in terms of how these new tools are going to be tackled. The importance of borders, I think, is going to become very important, whether they're maritime borders or they are political borders. I think these are extremely vital. And we're seeing that because as the world is shrinking conceptually from a globalized world to a more nationalistic world, borders are going to become more important. We are seeing this just now in COVID. Within literally a week of Omicron, the emergence of Omicron, and many countries don't even have a single case. We are seeing how fast borders are shutting down, or so many hurdles are being created in terms of entry, quarantine, and RT-PCRs and whatnot. And they are not uniform standard. There's so many different nations who have adopted different techniques for dealing with this. I think we're also going to see different standards. So as technology develops very fast, I think standards are going to be important. And I think we're going to live in a world, thanks to the bipolar construct, of essentially two world standards. One, a more Western, freewheeling, open architecture type of standard led by at the peak by the US, and another kind of more closed system with China in the lead. So, and these are going to have profound implications for countries such as India. What we are also going to see by whether it's 2030 or more likely 2050, that the E7 are going to be more prosperous than the G7. And that's both an opportunity for us as well as a challenge. So that's the world of geopolitics. And I think a lot of this is going to have a direct implication on policy making as well as legal education. Second point on ESG. Building on what I just said, I think it's clear that we are at, the world is facing an existential threat. Mumbai, where I live, has been predicted by 2050, or at least parts of Mumbai are predicted to be going underwater. And there are at least 13 globally important cities like Mumbai, which are going to face this threat. And these will have profound implications. So this challenge, firstly, of climate change will have to be fought at every level. It has to be fought it has not merely to be handled by the state, but I think the private corporation, the public company will have to play its role. Within that, individuals will have to play their role. And in the professions, I think the lawyers, more than anyone else, will have to play a significant role. The good thing about being a lawyer is that you have boardroom access. I think that the boards listen to you. We have a role to play in terms of following of standards. We have a role to play in terms of influencing how good decision making is done. So I don't see the E, S, or the G being merely statistics. I think they're going to be very significant real issues which are going to impact the practice of law itself. We have, from a corporate governance and hence corporate law practice itself, already in India embraced the stakeholder model. Newer and newer regulations have come up. SEBI has come up with what's called the BRSR and sustainability reporting, which is going to be a pretty big deal from next year onwards for the first 1,000 companies. So what law firms and lawyers and hence law schools will have to produce are what I call the ESG aware lawyer, who are very fluent in ESG concepts. We from our law firm point of view, we have founded a separate ESG practice, which is and is kind of growing from strength to strength. We see in future not merely pure lawyers within it, but it will probably have a multidisciplinary content. The third point I'd like to make is on future technology, data, and automation. So as they say, there's a study which has been done that 85% of the 2030 jobs, that's not too far, just 8 years, do not even exist today. So with the recognition that kind of data is the new oil, to use a cliche, and the vast volumes of data that are being produced with essentially a internet-based world, the entire framework in relation to how data will be managed and how technologies will be kept ethically aligned, I think is a whole new sort of area of law and policy that is yet to emerge. And this is tremendous opportunity for young lawyers. As far as training is concerned, augmented reality, virtual reality, and AI are going to be very important. Our friend Mark Zuckerberg has already talked about the metaverse, and I can't even start imagining what kind of challenges that will create. You could land up committing a crime in the metaverse, and you don't know how the criminal law system will deal with it. Legal tech will not be just tech. I think it will move forward and actually become part of solutions. Training will be simulated. I can imagine, just like the astronaut example, that legal training or legal teaching as well will be simulated. Fourth point on importance of design. So generally, I think the traditional one-dimensional or two-dimensional training that is given in many professions, including the law, has not adequately factored in the element of design. Design thinking will have to enter legal services and delivery. So I don't know whether Jindal University offers design courses or not, but if not, I think this is certainly a big item to be introduced to curriculum, because what design thinking does is that it helps you focus on the solution, put the customer at the center rather than to put yourself at the center. Most of the kind of law firm and legal services models are designed with putting themselves at the center and not the client. What is the hourly rate model? The hourly rate model has put the law firms at the center of the model. The more hours you produce, the more profitable you are. Have we thought about how design thinking and how outcome-based solutions will work? So the future will belong to those firms and those organizations or service providers, and which need not be law firms, would have incorporated design thinking and found out new ways of collaboration. Last point is on what I call the verticalization of legal services delivery. So the horizontal view, which is kind of currently holding the field, is that legal services are horizontally divided. On the one end of the spectrum are the likes of the law firms and experts who handle the complex and more difficult problems. And on the other side of it are more process-oriented service providers who can do the simple things. You're either this or that. The outsourcing world, for example, belongs to that side. But what the future is more likely to show is that we will need to move to a more vertical model, where on either side of the current horizontal, say the law firms will have to have process and technology in the pyramid, and conversely also what are currently seen as the more processized, commoditized service providers will need more expertise. They will need more judgment. They will need more human intelligence in order to assess and fill in the gaps. So the future, I think, and nobody has yet properly done it. This is a problem that remains to be solved because it fundamentally changes the economic model and it has to happen because finally it's the clients who are asking for this. So the future lies in the vertical model, and the moot question is who will do it. The short-term implication for law firms is that they will really have to start focusing on knowledge management as a key function. Knowledge management has traditionally not been very, except barring a few firms, has not been one of the most important functions of the firm. But as you take this more vertical view of the future, there will be a huge focus on knowledge management and technology. So in conclusion, I'd like to add that the 2020s and the 2030s are going to be vastly different from the past. And they're not just another more efficient version of the past. I think they're going to be qualitatively different. More so in the 2030s. I think what's left of the 2020s is about 8 years. But within that, I think you will see the direction of change. And hence, I think the question for all of us to ponder, for law firms like me and universities like you, is how are we going to embrace this change and how are we going to get ready for this? So I'd like to sort of end my talk with leaving this question for us, all of us. I don't think there are any current answers, but at least, we're getting closer to know what the question is.
Well, thank you very much, Cyril, for a fascinating and comprehensive, set of ideas, reflections about what the situation and changing dimensions of law firm practices and how the future is going to be impacted. There are a number of questions that have already come in from our audience, but before I do that, I want to begin this conversation by some of my own questions as well. Cyril, in late April, Thomson Reuters published a piece and talked about the fact that about 1/4 of European investment funds classified themselves as quote unquote sustainable as investors' demand for adherence to environmental, social, and corporate governance, those concerns increased. Now, although demand for ESG compliant investment products is indeed increasing, there's a lot of confusion even in the European policymakers' context as to what are these standards. Now, interestingly, Thomson Reuters has observed that there is spillover effect on this demand, which is also impacting law firms. And they have said, and I quote, according to Thomson Reuters data, 42% of its large law clients have ESG practices, including Freshfields and Herbert Smith. Yes. So my question to you is that while you have already begun to take a leadership role in your own law firm in developing this practice, what are the fundamental changes that need to go through in the mindset of your clients to recognize the importance of it? Because of course, law firms as thought leaders can create areas of practice, but to what extent the typical Indian corporation, company, business enterprise is ready to reimagine its functioning and recognizing that ESG matters today?
So that's a great question. I think there are a number of dimensions to it. First, I think the market, is driving a lot of this change, the market and regulation. So in the market, there are the index funds like BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard and others, all of whom are driving the ESG agenda. Then there are other investors, including, for example, private equity or strategic investors, who now almost always insist on an ESG diligence or an ESG assessment before they put money to work. As far as the debt finance markets are concerned, we've already seen the rise of green finance. There are several green. So the financial consequences of embracing ESG has created both the right penalties and the right incentives. If you embrace ESG, your cost of finance is late and the market rewards you, it actually gets you better profits. And by not doing so, you're kind of endangering your own future. So that's an incentive-based model that we are seeing that is already at play. Second, I think there is thanks to the pandemic and all the daily conversations about climate change and things like that, I think there is a great awareness of the need to embrace ESG. A more nuanced answer would be that there has been a greater emphasis in the past on the G part of ESG. I think E is rapidly catching up, but as far as S, namely social, is concerned, it's lagging behind a bit. So there is very little attention that is currently being paid in a relative context to. So currently there were three horses. G is leading, E is not too far behind, and S is very far behind. And therefore, I think boards will have to think about these issues very carefully. And third point, I think, is regulation. So regulators and policymakers, like very specifically SEBI, has now introduced a new framework, which is going to kick in mandatorily from 1st of April in this now literally 4 months from now, which is going to require sustainability disclosures by the top 1,000 companies. So there is no option anymore. And every company will have to take a stand. So, and I think all of that at the back end drives creation of service capacity, whether it's the big four or the consultancies or law firm like us. So ESG is here.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for that. Let me move on to another important aspect which you briefly touched upon, which is the fact that what kind of legal education need to be in place for those future lawyers. But before I take it up, I want to ask you, as a leader of a major Indian law firm, which is in many ways a global law firm, what are the, let's say, training and capacity building programs that your law firm has put in place when it comes to nurturing new knowledge, new perspectives, new skills above and beyond the opportunities for lawyers to learn through working? Because the reason I'm asking this question is that when I look at global law firms in other parts of the world, increasingly there is a very strong sense of professionalization. There are a lot of external interventions happening. In fact, Wall Street's M&A powerhouse, Walter Lipton, Rosen and Carnes, which is not known for making senior lateral hires. Last year, it made an important exception, bringing on board a consultant, Leo Strine, the former Delaware Chief Justice and a leading proponent of governance reform. Now, these are the type of radical changes that are happening around the world to internally examine training, capacity building programs that big law firms have. My question to you is, how do you see reimagining this space?
So we're already doing a lot on this, and the entire learning and upskilling process has been a personal passion for me for long. So I think firstly, a lot depends on leadership, and particularly how the senior leadership of the firm sort of focuses on this and what are its core values. So if you're a firm that is only about, let's squeeze out every, hour of billable time from your lawyers and convert it to money, then I don't think you're going to invest in this. But if you're the kind of firm that kind of does a good balance between the short-term needs of profitability and the long-term needs of investing in the human capital of the firm, then you're at the right place. So what have we done? We have established an internal learning university. We actually call it that, which has two broad departments to it. One department is called the Leadership Academy. And what the Leadership Academy does is that it deals with all non-legal skills, whether it is how do you manage self, how do you manage team, how do you manage a business, how do you negotiate, how do you imagine the future, all of the stuff that is other than legal delivery. And on the other department is an actual technical legal university. I don't mean it in a Jindal University sense, but it teaches you about law, lots of L&D, and cutting edge research as well. So as you know, we produce a lot of thought leadership as well. So these are the two engines, and they're manned by very senior people. On the Leadership Academy side, we recruited somebody from industry who had actually set up a global leadership academy for a multinational and ran it that way. I should introduce her to you at some stage. And on the legal technical skill side, we have two of our former partners who wanted to get off the rat race, so to speak, and actually had an academic bent of mind. So they are leading that. So, but you know, these are we are still at the early stages. The most important thing is that learning and development more broadly and professional development is at the top of our agenda, because we are designing for the future.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for that. Cyril, let me slightly shift gears here. One of the things that has been a matter of major concern is that the relative unpredictability of regulation, and also possibly even the role of courts when it comes to corporate commercial tax and other type of disputes. Now, as a law firm which works with companies and corporations both in India and abroad, how do you help international investors, kind of instill a certain degree of faith in them to believe in the stability of Indian regulatory landscape, and yet ensure that the role of Indian regulators can be more positively impacting the business and investor climate in India?
So regulatory stability, as the way you just described it, is a mirage. It never happens. But I have great faith in the rule of law. I think India is one of those societies and nations which has a real rule of law. Yes, sometimes we can have our delays and all of that. So there could be sort of cholesterol in the system. But if you look at it at its core, it's one of the finest rule of law regimes in the world. So the only answer I give when a client asks the same question is, don't ask me about giving you any kind of opinions or assurances about the fact that this regulation will change or not change in the stability of the system. But I can definitely tell you that India's rule of law is right up there. And I think that should be enough for people. Because when you look at the investment destinations options across the world, you could have many places which have a stable regulatory regime, but no real rule of law. I would rather, if I were to trade off one, I would take rule of law.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for that. There are more questions coming in, but let me ask one more question, then take up questions from audience. Just before the pandemic, Cyril, India had approximately 30 million cases pending in Indian courts. Just now, a few weeks ago, the Honorable Chief Justice of India announced that there are nearly 50 million cases now pending in Indian courts, which is approximately 5 crores, as we call it in India. So my question to you is that, despite efforts to build a serious alternative dispute resolution practice in India, there have been numerous challenges for it to evolve and become a part of an Indian narrative. How do we address this issue? Because this ties in quite nicely with what you mentioned, which all of us share, which is that we are a rule of law society in which independent courts and judiciary is involved in adjudication. But the reality is the costs that are associated with litigation can be hugely disincentivizing people to go in that route, and ADR being what it is, that also has its own challenges.
So this is a very difficult problem. And the question that you have asked me is that, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer to that is one spoon at a time. So that's the only way you can effectively deal with this. But this is a very nuanced problem, because all those 5 crore cases are not all very important cases. They comprise a very different mix. There are constitutional cases, there are tax appeals, there are small claims, there are small recovery claims, there are traffic offenses, there is all sorts of stuff. So you will have to find different ways to cut this. It's like an overall disease which requires a cocktail of medicines to cure it. There is no one cure. You can't just appoint 500 judges and expect to fix the system. I don't think ODR can fix the system on its own. You will have to go at it one spoon at a time from different directions. And the fact of the matter is that we are a very large country. Because of this problem on delays, there is a arbitrage there's a litigation arbitrage which an unscrupulous litigant will always take advantage of. If they can play the system, why not? So there is no moral answer to this. There is no structural answer to this. We just have to, as they say in the movies, lage raho.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for that. Let me now take up the questions from our audience. Well, there are a number of questions. I'm going to pick up a few. We have another 10 to 12 minutes or so. The first question is about what are the lessons that your law firm, but also maybe Indian law firms in general, have learned from COVID-19, and what among those lessons you think, or even practices you think, can be carried forward in a post-pandemic world?
So I dealt with that in some of my initial comments on what we have learned, but if I can now answer it specifically with reference to law firms, and I'm going to talk about mine. I don't know about the others.
Sure.
I think the first thing that we learned is that leadership matters, and that in times of crisis, leadership matters even more so. You have to be out there and communicating with your lawyers and your entire workforce, because at a time when there is so much uncertainty, when there is a kind of a storm outside, I think there has to be somebody who has to kind of stand up there, communicate and comfort the organization. So a law firm is essentially a organization of human beings and people who have their insecurities and their emotions and all of that. So you have to lead with a human perspective. I think that is lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is that you have to be flexible and adaptable. We switched on 17th of March 2020 from a full work from office to a work from home in a second. And we didn't have some big committee to set up to look at it. We just decided that this has to be done. We can't put our people at risk. So we pursued a people first strategy. And since we already had the technology platform for us ready since years, I think that was easy. So flexibility is one. And I think that's also a more general answer to the VUCA world problem. I mean, again, to quote Darwin, it's not the strongest or the smartest of the species that survive. It's the most adaptable. And like any other animal in the animal kingdom, a law firm, if you think of it as an animal, only the adaptable ones will survive.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for that. That's, I think, very instructive, and that's the most pragmatic approach for the future. There's a very interesting question about does the pandemic in many ways reinforced the need for people to look inwards rather than outwards? In a way, if you look at the European context, the pandemic has created opportunities, different forms of even xenophobia, security-related, doubtfulness to have. And obviously, the Brexit is one example, but there are many more. Does that possibly change the way law firms were used to functioning? Is it part of an imagination where this is a time when less risk-taking on the part of clients will impact the law firm world?
So firstly, just to comment on your last comment, clients are not taking any less risk. There are two kinds. There is one set of clients who are taking much less risk, but there is an equally aggressive and large constituency that are betting the company. They're taking the biggest risks of their lives because they see this as an opportunity and they're growing exponentially. So I don't think it's fair to say, as we sit in December 21, that the pandemic has made people more risk averse. I think it has generated two types of responses. One response is that this is that the pot has been stirred by the virus and everything is up for grabs. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to kind of reinvent yourself. So let's take big bets and do it. So then, and these names are in the papers every day. So that's one type of company, and those that are kind of looking at the whole thing with fear and are going inward and are actually shrinking. So that's as far as the clients are concerned. But turning to your first part of your question on the human side of the talent force, so you touch upon a very important issue. And I think the virus there are two diseases at play over here. One is the coronavirus with all its variants, and the second is the mental health problem. So it is not talked about, but it is massive. And even relatively, robust, friendly, positive people, because of the isolation, because of how the virus has affected some of their near and dear ones, has scarred people's psyche a lot. So how this epidemic, this mental health epidemic, is going to be dealt with, I think we have to see. It is not going to be fixed by just having a few psychiatry lectures. I think it is going to require a long time. These are very deep scars that are embedded. The only way I can think of to deal with it is by continuous doses of positivity and growth. Because when you create that kind of positive energy, it kind of overpowers the negative energy, and you create a momentum. But this is the second big problem, and I think it has affected everyone.
Thank you very much, Cyril. There are two fascinating questions, and I'm going to club both of them. This is about the future of legal industry. There have been writings and reports on both these aspects. The first question is that it seems that businesses are increasingly, taking recourse to what is known as alternate legal service providers for different types of legal service, including, say, for example, non-traditional companies that specialize in providing high-demand legal services such as document review, contract management, litigation support, and what are the possible implications of this for the large law firm? Another question, but I think you can come and answer this, the big elephant in the room, in a way, the big four accounting firms, KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, and Ernst & Young, they have been gradually expanding the legal service offerings throughout Asia, Europe, Latin America, and Middle East. This could also be because of the fact that increasingly companies are wanting to have a one-stop shop. It will be nice if you can reflect on both these developments and how it can potentially impact the future of legal industry, at least so far as India is concerned.
So let me take both questions separately. As far as alternative legal service providers, or ALSPs as they're called, so this is not something new. This phenomenon has been around now for over 15 years or more, maybe. And as I look at it today, I think they are very technology oriented, but they're solving a certain type of problem in that horizontal view of the market that I described there on the other side. And as I see them today, maybe if you asked me the question 10 years ago, I would have seen them as a bigger threat. I would have seen them as potentially having the ability to gobble up the entire kind of market for legal services. But as I look at it today, I don't see that. I think whilst they are servicing a certain segment of the market and are solving a certain variety of problems which are more process and technology oriented, I don't think that they have made any headway in the sort of arena where the kind of problems that law firms are solving, of complex negotiation, where there is a lot of interpretation and persuasion that is required. I don't see them. If you look at the list of top 100 firms in the world, you won't find even one ALSP there. And then whether it is revenue or impact, so they have their place in the market. The legal market is like a zoo, and there is like place for every animal, and they have their place. I respect them for what they do, but I don't think that they are, at least currently, an existential threat to law firms. To an extent, the same answer holds good for the Big Four. The Big Four come, of course, from a slightly different angle. I think they are very strong on tax and certain aspects of compliance. They kind of nibble at the heels of the law firms on that type of work. But at the end of the day, again, same thing. I mean, would you use them for a big M&A negotiation, or would you use them in courts for a big, bet the company case? I think answer is no. They're just another animal in the big zoo. And they're different from the first variety of, they're different from law firms, and they're different from ALSP. Yes,
thank you very much.
Entry into the market has changed the composition, but I think law firms are still safe.
Thank you very much, Cyril. It's a very interesting question from what you spoke a bit about technology and automation. This is about artificial intelligence. Now, of course, the talk about AI impacting the world of data and law has been there for a while. Now, Deloitte has predicted that 100,000 legal roles will be automated by 2036, and law firms will have to start using new talent strategies in the next several years. So my question to you is that how does a law firm prepare itself to respond to the role that artificial intelligence, robotics, and machine learning can potentially impact the world of legal services?
So artificial intelligence, robotics, and machine learning are three different things. And I think so far what has entered is more of the machine learning part. AI, or at least general AI, has not yet entered the world of legal services delivery. Even where we see AI in the law, it is on specific tasks that you see AI, whether it is on document discovery or specific types of tasks. The kind of general AI that can potentially, which we see in the movies sometimes, which can replace a human lawyer or human intelligence, that currently doesn't sort of exist. But to answer your question, what should law firms do? I think they should keep themselves on the journey of learning and curiosity. I think there is a big mistake that sometimes law firms work that I don't want to be the first. I want to wait for somebody else to solve this, and then I will come later. That's a big mistake, because every law firm is different. Every law firm's context is different. Its culture is different. So we took the first view that we don't mind being the first, and that's why we've been the first on almost everything. We know and we learn more from our mistakes than from our successes. So we have, if I look at our kind of journey over the last 4-5 years since we've been using some of these technologies, we're at a very different point today than we were 4-5 years ago. Do we think that this investment in technology has fundamentally changed our economic model? No. But has it increased our preparedness for facing the future? Yes.
Thank you so much, Cyril, for that fascinating response to probably we'll just move into last two questions. This is a very interesting question on data. Of course, this is also very contemporary. On the one hand, technology is advancing and new things are emerging. And equally important is many countries like ours do not have a very strong data protection or data privacy laws. especially when it comes to online matters. Now, in this situation, how should law firms, including law firms that are at the vanguard of promoting leadership, continue their operations, ensuring proper security and confidentiality? What should law firms do in such countries when they are dealing with almost a lack of regulatory, compliance, but they'll have to have the trust and the faith of their clients when it comes to data?
So, we are, this very well. I think we are on the threshold of a law. I think just yesterday, the JPC, the term has been extended till the end of the session. So probably till the end of the year. So we are weeks, if not months away from a new data protection legislation, general data protection legislation. Of course, it will still go through the hoops of, debate in Parliament. It will then have a 2-year waiting period. It might go through a customary round of constitutional challenges and all of that. But whatever it is, in the next 2, 3, 4 years, India is going to have a world-class data protection law. That's a fact. So I think for the future that will be solved, and then we will be like, India is the only major economy in the world without a general data protection legislative regime. We've got the IT Act, which is kind of vague and general, which doesn't really count. But the kind of GDPR style or PDP style legislation is yet to come. So that will change the practice, the formal practice of, it's going to create a lot of opportunity. According to me, the Data Protection Authority, or the DPA as it's called, is going to be the most powerful regulator in the country. And I think part of the risk is the fact that so many powers are, and without any adequate legislative guidance, you are going to have all sorts of problems and litigation and whatnot. I think there's no comparison between the kind of authority that they have. Now, in the short term, what should law firms and service providers do? Just keep their data properly and make sure that you are following commonsensical cybersecurity standards.
Thank you, Cyril. I have one last question, and that is from me. In my experience of working and observing leading law firms around the world, is that I have noticed a fair amount of intellectual investment and time investment made by leaders in law schools. They offer full-fledged courses, they spend time with students, mentoring, and they look at law schools not just as recruitment avenues for their own firm, but to create the next generation of lawyers and capacity building on that front. I'm afraid that most of Indian law firms, and I would say Indian lawyers and judges, have had a very indifferent, if not irresponsible, attitude towards law schools. And I'm not talking about the random lectures and conferences, but I'm talking about substantial engagement in law schools. What can we do to instill that among leaders of Indian law firms, including recognizing the importance of engaging with law schools and law students in a substantive manner?
I think that's a great question, and this is a topic that has been troubling me. We've discussed it many times as well. Is that there is a great opportunity for creating partnerships. So I think, as you rightly said, that the consumers of law, whether it's law firms or the profession, have to stop thinking about law schools as merely kind of manufacturing factories, but have to look at you as partners. And that we have to continuously keep kind of investing in you for making sure that not only are curriculums designed appropriately, it has two-way street. So there is probably a problem at both ends, but I think university, you've been a pioneer, and therefore, I think you're doing great work. But if you look at the legal education sector as a whole across the country, there are only a few pockets of excellence, and there's much more that can be done. And I personally have always believed that the future lies in creating these kind of academic partnerships.
Thank you very much, Cyril Shroff, for this fascinating discussion, reflections, and of course, your candid responses to my questions and also the questions from the audience. Everybody who was part of this program absolutely enjoyed. I truly appreciate the fact that you came on board and be part of this Global Law School Summit. I'm grateful to you for your leadership. And also, it's absolutely critical for young lawyers to imbibe some of the values that has led to you becoming what you are today and your firm becoming what it is today. So once again, congratulations for all your extraordinary achievements, both including the opening up of the New Delhi new office of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, but also the fact that you have remained an inspiring figure in the world of law and legal profession. Thank you.